Well, pull out the pin and stand back, because right now, to talk about the recent tax changes for landlords, I am joined by Fergus Wilson, one of the best known and high profile landlords in the UK. So Fergus, thank you very much. Welcome back to Property Tribes. And we've kind of had an insight into your views because you've joined some of our discussions, but here we are in person. What do you think of the tax changes that were announced in the recent summer budget?
Well, I think it's going to result in a diminishment of the number of landlords, particularly recent entrants, and some who would be landlords will not become landlords after all. I think we have to be clear that the government needs private sector landlords. The government doesn't want to directly or indirectly fund social housing. It looks towards the private sector landlord, but then if you make it too unattractive, then nobody wants to play with the football. So basically, they brought a windfall tax in to some of the more affluent landlords. I think the government feels that some of them, such as myself, are becoming too strong. We perhaps dominate. Perhaps that's not a good thing. On the other hand, perhaps we understand what we're doing, and that's why we dominate. I think the situation is that the government is very, very keen to reap windfall tax, and that's what it's all about, getting tax revenue in. But at the same time, they've got a balance they have to keep to ensure that private people, and I don't necessarily mean large landlords, but private people actually continue to prop up the rental market.
But maybe, there's a more sinister agenda behind it, that they actually want to rid the PRS of the smaller, unprofessional landlords because they don't have control over those landlords. They don't even know who they are. So, it's my belief that they actually do want to get rid of the vast majority of private landlords and open the doors to institutional investment. Do you have concerns that that's the real agenda behind this?
No, I don't think that's the agenda at all. I think probably they do wish to encourage an awful lot of small people rather than a few big fish. They would like institutional lenders to come back on the scene after they had been funding what should we call secured tenancies for years, but they've all dried up. But I think really the situation is we are so short of property in this country. The issue comes down to this: do we fund it through the government, through the tax system, in which part, if so, everybody contributes, and that's the situation with social housing. It's all owned by everyone. Or do we do it through private sector initiatives? And I think we're going to get to the situation that the government is going to sit down, perhaps with people such as yourself at Property Tribes, and sort out a landlord package. What is it the government wants? What is it the landlord wants? My experience over the last 2-3 weeks is it's no longer a question of landlords gobbling up properties which owner-occupiers would have been buying. It's the reverse. And the owner-occupiers are now gobbling up landlords' properties when they come onto the market. This is due to the shortage. I live down in Kent. I do appreciate it's far, far more difficult up in London. And, in the north of England and other parts of England, it's probably just a non-entity they've read about in the papers.
Well, we're hearing sort of from sources close to the Treasury that there's not going to be any U-turn on this. The end result is that rents will rise, and you yourself have been creating a little bit of controversy and discussion on the broadsheets, because you've already said that you are putting up your rents quite significantly to prepare for this tax change.
Yes, well, basically, it's very, very simple. For every penny the tax goes up, or my outgoings go up, then by a similar amount, 1 penny, the rents go up. If you, the government's not going to sort of turn around and give various tax reliefs to landlords, but if it did, then probably the rents would fall down. At the end of the day, it's the government, and David Cameron is the man in the driving seat at the moment. It's the government that's got to provide the housing. Now, how are they going to do it? At the moment, they are driving away, particularly would-be small landlords. And by small, I mean 2 or 3 houses, a smaller number of houses. They're driving those away, but they need them. Now, I think that's what's not well thought out. Any time in the past when we've had things such as capital gains tax, and it's forever being altered, as you know. We used to have tapering, and now it's 18% or 28%, whichever you're on. Things change. Now, when landlords were holding onto properties for a long, long time, then you've got to start thinking, well, where are you going to get your revenue from? Because not from capital gains, because they're holding onto it for too long. And you need immediate revenue to run a country. So where do you get your money from? I'm afraid it all goes back to the number of houses available, and there is no quick fix.
No.
I'll be very, very blunt. Some tenants have got to go without being housed. Now, it isn't the duty of the private sector landlord to house these people. It's the duty of the government.
So you're saying we're going to see an increase in homelessness?
Yes, we're going to see an increase in homelessness. And as more and more people come over from Europe, if they come as legal immigrants, they're quite entitled to be here. If they're illegal, then they're not entitled until such times as they become legal. But basically, for every one person that comes over, that's another space you have to find, another house, flat or whatever, for those people. And to a certain extent, they are depriving indigenous English people, and I'm sure various groups have got something to say about that. But really, at the end of the day, what do you do? The government is trying to get a quart into a pint pot. The real issue is, what do you do when you've got insufficient houses? And what you shouldn't be doing is driving away small investors. I think they need lots and lots of small investors, by which I mean to buy 1, 2, 3 houses. The difficulty is they are very inexperienced. It takes an awful lot of time to build up the experience. Oscar Wilde used to talk about the knowledge of a lifetime. And I think that's absolutely right.
Well, that's one of the reasons that we formed Property Tribes, was to help educate landlords about these issues and being a better landlord and providing a better level of service for their tenants. But I mean, is the bottom line, Fergus, that this new landlord tax is actually a tax on tenants?
Well, it is a tax on tenants. It's an indirect tax on tenants, unless you choose to be homeless, and that's not much of an alternative.
No.
But basically, it will be passed on like everything else. And as soon as you put tax up £5 a week, the rents will go up £5 a week. And effectively, that's what's happening. That the tax regime means £5 a week or equivalent less income.
So you seem to be taking actually quite a pragmatic view that, from a business perspective, if your costs are going up, you're obviously going to increase your rents. But surely if tenants are already struggling to pay rents, how are they going to cope if rents rise significantly because of the tax changes? It's forcing the market up.
It's the poorer people who always suffer. And the poor people, I mean, they've got a terrible time at the moment. We used to hear a lot about single mums. I just don't come across them now because I cease taking people on benefits. And the reason was actually that the local housing allowance went downwards, the rents went upwards, suddenly the gap was too big, and we had so many people defaulting. And I'm quite aware that the vast majority of them weren't defaulting on purpose, they just didn't have enough money. They'd taken their houses when in fact they could stretch to paying for them. Then of course the local housing allowance goes down and they can no longer afford. You can't really blame them, but we just have to say, look, I'm sorry, but we can't go on funding this. It's the government's job.
Well, it sounds to me like there's a perfect storm brewing. There isn't a quick fix, as you said. Tenants are going to suffer. And the thing about private landlords is that they do provide a lot of choice to tenants. We have a wide range of properties, from flats to 4 or 5 bed houses. Not everybody wants to buy their own home, and some people want to rent a good quality property in a good area, and it's the private landlord, isn't it?
I think the situation, the private landlord does this. It provides accommodation for those who choose not to own or are unable to own. The majority of them are unable to because of financial reasons. And now they are being required to fund more and more and more themselves. When I first started, we used to sort of put in 15%, sometimes far less than that, but basically about 15%. Now our private sector landlords got to put in something from 25% to 40%. So basically, for every 3 houses you could buy in the past, you can only buy 1 now. Now, the government is obviously worried about people defaulting, landlords defaulting, because if the landlords default, probably the tenant loses the house as well. And the situation, they've decided that we better have a safety first policy. In other words, you put in more of the equity than previously. That's probably good sense, but on the other hand, there's a price to pay, and that is the lack of availability of rental houses.
Well, we've got one landlord on our forum, Angela Bryant, who has said she's selling up her 100 properties. You've got 800 left in the Ashford area. You're exiting anyway because you've reached the end of your landlord career. So just 2 landlords, we're talking 900 families out of a home. And that's just 2 landlords. What about the other landlords watching this that fear that they're not going to continue
collectively, they are the majority.
But it still adds up to a lot of properties.
If you say I've got one foot in the grave, that's why I'm coming out at this point.
No, you're retiring to enjoy yourself.
That's what it is it? Now, I think what's going to happen is David Cameron and his buddy next door, George Osborne, are going to sit down with landlords' representatives and start talking common sense. Now, all this bit about, with Maggie Thatcher, the lady's not for turning. If you don't turn, you're not going to have much more investment from small landlords. They're going to be looking for other things to invest in. And you must understand the statistics at the moment. I own a lot of properties, as you have said. But there are 23% private sector landlords, i.e. houses, 23% are owned by private sector. 22% are social landlords, and that's been the percentage for some years now. And 55% are actually owner-occupiers. That says to me, 55% of house owners or house occupants, they own 23% of rented properties. It's almost an average. 1 in 3 owner-occupiers owns a buy-to-let property. Well, that's the average. In reality, of course, it isn't that, because people like me own an awful lot. But
some own 1 or 2.
Yeah. But you've got to, basically everybody has got some interest in renting, because either they rent or a relative rents. Everyone's got problems. We have to understand that the government of the day which was elected in May this year, was overwhelmingly elected. There will not be another general election for 5 years, or 4.5 I should say. And they are in there for the long trawl. They're not bothered about what landlords say, but I think they will have to change, because pretty soon they're going to realise we're running out of houses. The situation is, if you are an estate agent now, you haven't got any stock to sell, and you must always have a few 5% of the houses so people can move around. It's all stagnated, and it's not only selling, it's the same with renting. People can't go from house A to house B because there's nothing available. And we're getting more and more people come over from Europe, and you know, if they are allowed to be here, they're entitled to be here. They come over to work. They're entitled to live somewhere as well. You've got to accept that. And there's just not enough houses to go round. We, however, in this forum, have got to think of landlords, not of the problems which the government's got to resolve, the housing minister, etc. But what they are doing at the moment is as simple as this. They're saying to some small landlords, maybe you ought to be investing in something else other than the houses, which is a terrible thing to say when you're so short of houses.
That's the bottom line. You're absolutely right, Fergus. It's been a lack of, successive governments have failed to build enough houses. Now this new tax on landlords is going to discourage investment in the private rented sector, and we're going to see a lot of fallout from this. And I want to urge everybody watching this to check out our action plan that Property Tribes is proposing to actually, as Fergus says, get in front of the policymakers and actually make sure that our views are heard and understood. Now is not a time for landlords to be complacent and sit back. We've got to have a voice in all of this. So Fergus, thank you very much for joining your important and credible voice to ours in talking about this issue. We want to encourage discussion. We appreciate all views, and we want to really debate this and understand the implications. So thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.